Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Robbie Chess. I haven't been playing in a tournament for a while, so I thought I'd just go over some games I've been playing online. These are correspondence games, so games I've been playing with 7 days a move. This game is against a strong chess player who's a friend of mine, childhood friend of mine. We used to play tournaments together as kids. We've recently caught up and played a few games online. This was a pretty fun game, so let's see how it went, and I'll try and explain to you guys what I was thinking. So I was black in this position, and my opponent started d4, played a knight f6, and then he really surprised me. He played knight c3. So I'm used to people playing c4. I haven't played, like I said, I haven't really played in a while. I don't know all the latest theory. I didn't know this opening. So he played knight c3, and I'm guessing with the idea of e4. So what do you do if your opponent surprises you in the opening? I went back later and had a look at this opening, and it's called the Jobava London. So it is a trendy opening at the moment, but when I was playing with him as a child, this opening was never seen, so quite new. So in this type, if your opponent surprises you, it's good to go back to basic principles. Normally if I play my pawn up and get my bishop out and castle, if I just follow what I normally do without thinking, I could get into trouble once my opponent plays e4, e5, and my knight has to retreat, causing me to waste time. So I have to react quickly in the center, and I think the only move that made sense to me was to play d5 to prevent the e4 move. So I felt like that was a forced move. My opponent played bishop to f4, and I thought he's going to go potentially for knight to b5, and then putting pressure on my c-pawn. So again, I just felt play a natural move, play c6, stopping knight b5, strengthening the center. Can't be a bad move. My opponent plays e3, and now I wanted to play e6 and get my bishop out this way, but before doing that I want to get my bishop outside the pawn chain. So I deviated from my normal opening here, just making moves that make sense. He plays the knight to f3 and I play e6. So I've got a pretty solid setup in the center here. My bishop's outside my pawn chain. My knights can both be developed and my bishop can be developed. So as far as the opening's gone, I feel like this is a pretty comfortable position for black. I feel like I'm not under too much pressure or anything. This will probably end up being a bit of a slower game. So then my opponent played knight e5. So he's coming in, settling the knight in on an outpost. I played h6. So what's the idea of h6? Well, when my opponent played knight to e5, I thought he has a plan of playing g4. That's why he played it so quickly. And then when my knight goes back, my bishop goes back, sorry, h4. So let's just make another move. Let's just play bishop e7. I'll show you guys. So g4. Now where does my bishop go? So if it goes in to the middle, he plays f3, and I have to retreat anyway. So I'd probably have to go back to here, to g6, then h4 is coming. The next move is threatening to win the bishop. So it's a very aggressive opening. So how do I save the bishop? Well, I have to move a pawn. So if I move a pawn like this to give my bishop a square, now it makes sense why he moved the knight up. He can take, destroying my pawn structure, leave me with a weak pawn on e6, and then he's got ideas of g5 coming, and this didn't look good to me. So I preempted all of that and played h6 right away. The other option would have been probably to play h5 to stop g4 as well, but I didn't want to open up my king too much, so I decided just to go with a little h6. And now he played g4 anyway, and now I can tuck my bishop away straight away rather than moving it there and then trying to move it there. So I've saved myself a move, and he can't take it either. So now that he's made my bishop waste a move, he's now brought his bishop out, threatening to swap off and stop me from castling. So I took his bishop, and he took with the pawn. I expected him to take with the queen, but he took with the pawn, which is probably good too, because it strengthens the center and allows him to play the e4 move that I had stopped earlier with g5. He's got a bit more space than me, and he's got 3 pieces developed, which, hang on, let me get all this. So he's got 3 pieces developed against my 1, but it is my move. So I feel like I've got to try and catch up in development. So I played my knight out, and if I can exchange off his pieces that I've already moved a couple of times, it'll let me catch back up in development. So he played h4, again, gaining more space. So I took off the pieces. So when you're behind in, it's a trick for you guys, when you're behind in space, when you feel like you're getting squashed, as in these pawns are coming up the board, and you've only moved up 1, most of my pawns have only gone up 1 except for 1 pawn. It's a good idea to try and exchange some pieces off, because as the pieces come off, these pawns will become weaknesses. When there's a lot of pieces on the board, there's strengths, because my pieces, when my knight was here, can't really go anywhere. So in chess, it's a fun game, but strengths and weaknesses can be the same. So a strength in one position, a few moves later can become a weakness. So your job is to try and change them from strengths to weaknesses. So my job is, in this position, he's got a strength of more space and better development. My job is to swap pieces off to reduce his development lead, and also, as I swap pieces off, to then attack his weaknesses that he's created. So you'll see this is a very strategic game. There's not very many tactics in it. It's just a slow and steady strategy, and you'll watch my strategy play out. So at the moment, I'm a bit, as you can see, I've only got 1 pawn up to the halfway. My opponent's got 3 pawns halfway and a bishop opposite, like over the halfway line. So he's got more space, but you'll see over time how I use these weaknesses against him. So I played knight d7, like I said, swap off pieces. If I can take the bishop, that helps me. And look, notice how my queen is eyeing the pawn as well. So like I said, weaknesses. He moves the bishop back, and now I play bishop e7. I could have pinned the knight, but I decided to play bishop e7. And again, look, now I've developed with a gain of time. I'm attacking a weakness. So then he retreats the bishop. He doesn't want to commit the pawn up to the light square. So now, if you look, both bishops and knights are developed, and I've caught up in the development. My bishop and knight look like they're just sitting back and not doing much, but you'll see they're actually not on bad squares. So my next move is bishop to f6. And you might be thinking, what's that move do? Well, why not knight f6? Well, I decided I want my bishop attacking the d4 point, and because this pawn was doubled, and his queen isn't defending and he can't play c3, my plan was to try and attack his center with c5. And if I ever attack his center with c5, he'd be forced to take, because if I take him and he takes back, then I win a pawn. So he's going to be forced to take, and then I can bring my knight up. So it starts to chip away at his center here. So he plays f4, stopping the mid from going e5. And then, like I said, I just chip away at the center. Now he's pretty much forced to take, otherwise I'm going to win a pawn. He can, for example, bring the bishop back, but once I take and he takes, these 2 pawns are doubled up and they're not looking very healthy. For example, queen b6, something like this, putting pressure on the pawn, putting pressure on that pawn. You can see that these pawns, all these pawns he's got, are starting to become weak, even this one. So I'm starting to turn it around and use his pawns against him. He's got a lot of air behind these pawns, whereas my position is nice and compact. Bishop defends a pawn, king defends a pawn. It's very hard for him to take any of my pawns. So like I said, that's my goal. So he took the pawn. All right, now I had to stop and think. So I had 7 days to make a move, but this is one of the hardest for me decisions in chess. It's when you got a choice to create an imbalance in the game, and by an imbalance I mean we both have a bishop, dark squared bishop, and a knight. Now, do I take the pawn, or do I first swap off bishop for knight and then take the pawn? What's the difference, you say? Well, I have to assess whether I think this knight is stronger than this bishop, or whether if I swap this off, this knight will be stronger than this bishop. It's very complicated. It's hard to actually know. I felt if I took, for example, if I took here, he'd have a move like this coming, and even if I actually can't do that because I can take and I can take there, so I'm covered. That wasn't the idea. Yeah, but I felt with... What is my thing doing? I felt if I took here, for example, d4, whereas if I jump with the knight in the center, which is where I'd love to go, look, he can swap it off. Once that gets swapped off, my bishop's probably slightly better than his, but I mean, I'd have to come back this way and try and come around here for a check. But he could castle and bring the bishop back and then bring the bishop to here. And I felt like the bishop versus bishop, I felt like it's pretty blocked up in the center now. So I felt like it wouldn't give me any advantage or any chance to win. So in this position, I decided to take and then take. There's also something very specific about this position. With the knight on c5 and no pawn on the b file, and the only way he can attack my knight is by playing d4. If he ever plays d4, my knight jumps into e4. And you'll notice the bishop is on a dark square and can't attack the light square. So if he plays a move like this, and I get the knight to here, I felt like this is a very good knight versus a bishop that's stuck behind its own pawns. My knight's attacking the pawn here, attacking the bishop here. If he moves the bishop or defends it, I can take the pawn here, or I can even just play rook c8 and put more pressure and take with the rook. So this will give me an advantage. This knight here is an advantage over the bishop. So he can't play d4. If he can't play d4, then my knight's permanently attacking the d3 pawn, which he can't move because he can't play d4. So now if he can't move the d3 pawn, and he can't defend the d3 pawn with his bishop because it's on a dark square, he has to use a queen or king or rook to defend the d3 pawn. So I've got a knight tying up a major piece. So if this stays here permanently for the rest of the game, he's just going to be stuck defending. I've got ideas like bringing my queen out, here or here, and then across down, look, attacking the pawn again. So I can tie up two pieces with my knight and my queen. So I felt like this is actually a slight advantage for me. He played king to e2, like defending the pawn, and I played queen a5. So developing my queen. Notice I haven't castled yet. I'm attacking this pawn and then attacking this pawn. So I've got my queen in an active position, and I've got my knight in an active position. So you can see I'm targeting three weaknesses. If you look at my opponent's pieces, they were further advanced earlier on, but now the bishop's stuck behind its pawns. He can push this pawn to f5 to activate the bishop, so that's something I've got to be careful of. But you'll notice this bishop can't really attack anything at the moment. Best it could do was probably get to d6 and try and dislodge my knight. So one idea is for him to try and get rid of the knight. But at the moment he's defending his pieces. So I move my rook over to c8 again, targeting weakness. I could play a move perhaps like knight to a4, and I'd suddenly have three attackers on here. So he's got to be careful. So he has to defend it again. And now I played castles. So finally I've completed my development. And look at the two kings. My king's nice and safe, tucked away behind the pawns which I haven't really moved, versus my opponent. All these pawns along here have moved up, and the king's a little bit more exposed. It's not in danger at the moment, but you'll see now what I'll try to do is, this is why I said it's a strategic game. I'll try and, if you imagine if these pawns were gone, let's get rid of all those. So this is where you've got to come up with a plan. So I've got queen attacking a weakness, a rook attacking a weakness, a knight attacking a weakness. What's the next step? What do? I don't really want to move my pieces too much because they're doing good jobs. How do I bring this rook into the game? Do I double rooks on the c file and then move the knight and try to win a pawn? That's one plan. Or if I can get rid of these center pawns, for example, these two and these two, then my rooks can attack in the middle and his king will be running around. Where does the king hide? The king can't really hide on the king's side too well because these pawns have all advanced. If those pawns were gone, there's no additional risk to my king. My king's nicely tucked away behind its pawn shield. So in certain positions like this, it might be to my advantage to open up the center. I can also, like I said, double it on the queen side over here and attack this weakness here. So you got to come up with a plan, what you think is the best plan. So he played rook over to b1, getting his rook onto an open file, and I decided to play queen a6 first. So again, I'm targeting the pawn, but I'm also setting a trap. My next move is knight coming to e4. Notice the pawn's pinned. He can't take my knight now, and the knight will be threatening the queen and the bishop. So if he plays a move like this, I'm threatening queen and bishop, and then the queen has to move, and then I can decide what I want to do next. But notice he can't move the king either way because of the knight, and he can't take the knight because it's pinned. So it puts me in a pretty strong position here to come up with a move. I don't have to take the bishop, and I might eventually have to move the knight, but if I ever move the knight back to f6, I'm attacking this one. And while it's staying in the center here, it's in a pretty good position. So what happened was, after queen a6, he played bishop back to e1, looking to defend this pawn. You'll see he's now got 1, 2, 3 defenders on here, so it's very securely defended. So then I decided, well, there's no point doubling up my rooks on here because it's already extremely well defended. If he wanted to, he could play rook b2, rook c2, and then he'd be covering this pawn and this pawn. You can see all the arrows everywhere. Everything's covered on the queen side. Okay, what's another plan? Well, that plan is not going to work. He's very well, all his pieces are on the queen side. He's very well defended. Like I said, now let's change tactic. Now that he's moved his pieces to the queen side, time to maybe open up the middle or attack back on the king side. You got to have some flexibility with your plans. So now I decided to sacrifice a pawn. Like I said, if the center pawns are gone, I'm in a good position. And this e5 move, if he doesn't take, and I get to play e4, well, he's so busy defending the c3 pawn that he's going to lose this pawn in the middle because I've got queen, knight, and a pawn, and it's pinned, and he can't defend it. So he's pretty much got to take. So he takes my pawn. So I've given up a pawn. Why did I give up a pawn? Well, like I said, he's moved all his rooks over to this side. He's brought the bishop back, which prevents the rooks from coming back. So he's locked himself over on one side of the board. So now what I want to do is switch to the other side. So queen g6. The reason I sacrificed the pawn was to open up my queen. So now my queen has switched from this side, all of a sudden it's switched over to the king side, targeting, like I said, a weakness. A pawn that's advanced too far. If this pawn were back, if these two pawns are back, he could have played king f1 and it'd be very hard to attack. But because the pawn's so far advanced, look at my queen. It's attacking this weakness and this weakness. Knight's attacking the weakness. So you can see I'm attacking here, I'm attacking here. I've given up attacking here, but I'm attacking over here. So he plays rook to b4, trying to bring the pieces back over to the king side that he had on the queen side. Now I've got to move a5. Now you'll notice that he wants to keep the rook defending this. If he moves the rook backwards now or forwards, I take with check. So let's just give an example. Say he moves rook up to here, threatening both of my things. Check, and the king can't escape that way, look. So the king's got to come this way or this way. So the king comes over here. Then I've got to move, like, for example, knight back. Let's just play the line. He takes a pawn, say, then f5, f6. Now, my next move is I'm going to take the pawn, open up my rook, and his king's toast. To give an example, say e5, check. And he's going to run out of squares. He's got to get checkmated pretty quickly. Checkmate. All of a sudden, from a position that was even, it's very quick checkmate. So things can get very dangerous very quick. So my opponent had to play rook to f4, in which case I played knight over to e6. So now the idea is if he moves the rook again back over here, I wouldn't repeat moves, I don't want to draw. What I would do is I'd play b5. And you'll notice that every single square on this file is covered by one of my pieces or pawns. The rook has nowhere to go. It can take a free pawn, but again, I would take that with check. He'd have to move across. f6 would become he could try and block. I'd take this way, for example, take the pawn, and then I can either take this or I can even just go for, I can go like this and win the queen. There's all sorts of things I can try and do, but his king's going to be very exposed. So after knight e6, he didn't move the rook. He saw that it was too dangerous to give up this pawn, so he decided to move his king up to just defend everything. Notice that because my knight has moved from here, I'm not attacking this anymore, so he can move the king away. So I took the material, and he gets to straighten out. He's got an extra pawn, so he's got this extra middle pawn, and his pawns are all defending each other. So it doesn't look like he's too bad, and he's got rid of my dangerous knight, but he had to give up a rook. So, okay, so what should I do? Well, he's got a bishop. So one way to play against the bishop is to try and make the bishop and the pawns be on the same color. So these 4 pawns are what I would call bad pawns for the bishop. And in that vein, my opponent's threat, what I call a positional threat, strategic threat, is to play a move like f5, putting his pawns on white squares, and my queen would, let's just play, just to show you guys. I'll say it's my move, so I play rook there, defending my pawn, centralizing, sounds like a bit. f5, and now my queen's got to move over somewhere, queen side, somewhere, say here or here, yeah, say there. And then he can play a move like either bishop here, with the idea of coming to the center and just having everything defended. So say I play a move like b4, he plays a move like this, everything's defended. He's got threats of playing e6, opening up the bishop. He's got threats of f6, and then queen coming in. So once the bishop gets to a nice stable square and it can move the pawns, it can be actually, I don't think I'd be losing, but it could get dangerous for me, and it would at least give him chances. So in this position, how do I stop all these chances? You can kind of see with the arrow, h5. So this is a positional move, but what it does, it basically disrupts his strong pawn, 4 pawns versus 3. So if he pushes the pawn, you'll notice that the threat of f5, I can play queen f5 next. He can pretty much never play f5. His bishop can't attack the light squares. My queen just sits here and even threatens to come in, and there's no way to get the pawn up. And because all these pawns are on dark squares and his bishop's on a dark square, it makes it look a bit silly. The bishop can't do anything. Even if it does manage to get to d4, the queen can't join in the attack. It's all blocked up. So that's why h5 is a key move in this position. And he responds by taking. He doesn't want to block up that much, so he takes, which opens up his king a little bit. And then he retreats his king again. So I've got rid of one of his pawns. But now if you look at these 3 pawns, they look a bit weak. This one's defended by the bishop, and this one's defended by the queen. So when I go queen g4 check, and he goes to the bishop block, you'll notice that's pretty much a pawn. It looks like a pawn now. It's in the chain. So he can try and again push these up, but if he does that too much, too early, I can take and bring my rook in. So it's double-edged. I decided to expand on the queen side. My plan is to stop him from playing c4, keeping the pawn on a dark square, and then simply doubling rooks. So if I can bring a rook here and a rook here, one, I'm pressuring the pawn, and he can't retreat with the bishop because his king is in check. And two, once my rook's here, I'm always threatening to swing it over here or here to attack the king. So I'm combining attack on the queen side with attack on the king side. You'll notice it's a common theme throughout this game. I'm trying to keep switching sides, and because he's got his pawns far advanced, it lets me switch sides back and forth and play around all the weaknesses. While myself, look at my king the whole game has just been sitting here behind these 2 pawns, nice and safe, nice and tucked away. There's no attack on my king at all. So he threatens my pawn. It's okay, nice and calm, just defend the pawn. He plays a3 to stop me from pushing up my pawn. Now I bring my other rook over. So I've got my rooks attacking the queen side and my queen harassing the king side. Again, I'm combining on both sides of the board. Rook b3, and now, like I said, rook c6, 1, threatening to come across, and then he'd have to bring the queen over to defend. So he unpins himself, and then I decide, well, I'll double first. When I double the rooks here, it ties down 2 of his pieces. Yes, he can take this pawn now, but if he takes this pawn, if he takes the pawn, I take this one, threatening to win the queen. So he'd have to come back to not let me win the queen. But then I've got other moves. I could infiltrate down here, threatening a move like, say for example, he takes my pawn, queen coming down, and look, threatening checkmate over here. So once my queen and rook get in, he's very exposed. So he played bishop back now, defending the pawn 3 times. So he's switched back over to the queen side. And then I played this move, d4. So this is I guess a tactic. It's not as strategic, but it's a tactic. But look how another pawn sacrifice. If he takes the pawn, he loses the queen. So it's not really a pawn sacrifice. I waited to play this d4 move so he couldn't play c4. Because if he could have played c4, then, like say if he'd taken this and then he could play c4, then, like say for example, it was something like this. What are my rooks doing here? These 2 pawns block out my rook, and you'll notice they're on light squares. So that helps him because he can bring the bishop back and attack my pawn. Queen can come over and attack my pawn. So I don't want him to get his pawns on the light squares. So I played d4 at the right time. And he played queen over, and then I took. So I win a pawn. It wasn't really a pawn sacrifice. So I won this pawn. Now he could take on b5. So I don't win a pawn, but then I get this move in, and all of a sudden I win on the queen side. The queen side, he can't bring the rook back. If he brings the queen back, I queen anyway. So I win on the queen side here. So he didn't play that. He played rook back to b1 with the idea of coming across, and then I played b4. Just a simple move, and he resigned. So the idea is, if he takes, I just take. This pawn's defended. Again, if he takes, like he could have taken before, I just play c2, and I get a queen. If he doesn't take, and plays a move like rook to c1, I can just push this one up, and then I'm just going to keep pushing my pawns up, and I'll eventually get a queen. You'll notice that my queen, I didn't end up checkmating or winning on the king side. I ended up winning on the queen side. But you'll notice how my queen on the king side here just ties his pieces over here. So my queen over here was just creating all sorts of threats, which forced my opponent to have to defend on the king side, which then let me break through on the queen side. So you notice in the game, if I start from this sort of position, where I swap the bishop for knight, like that. When I swap bishop for knight here, you'll notice my theme of the game was I attacked first on the queen side. First attacked on the queen side, and then he brought his pieces over. Then I switched to the king side, and then the pieces came back over. And then once I loosened up his pawns, then I went and attacked back over on the queen side. So I went queen side, king side, queen side. And then at the end, I finally had the queen side with my rooks and my queen on the king side. So I kind of went a bit of half and half. So you'll see how that's what's like strategy in chess. There wasn't many tactics in this game, but you can see how my plans played out, and I ended up winning a nice game. And thank you to my opponent for helping me. But yeah, this is a really nice game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you guys for the next one.